Hello and welcome to episode 6 of my Kerbal Space Program NASA series reboot. Hopefully this time around your ears will not be as heavily assaulted by table bumps and other such things, as I have moved my drink to a TV tray next to my desk instead of on the desk that it shares with the microphone. Who'da thunk? But after setting up a free return trajectory, the boys are given the go-ahead for their translunar injection burn. This will just be a lunar flyby without entering orbit. And this is not the 8th Apollo-ish mission I've flown. This is just because the flight profile is closer to the Apollo 8. I'm calling it Kerpolo 8 because I'm running this program and I get to choose the names. But with the burn complete, there's really not a lot of maneuvering that's going to have to be done for the rest of this mission, which is a good thing because you can see that my fuel states were pretty low from that burn. And I didn't get the periaps low enough to get near moon science, so I'm just going to take all my observations here at the very beginning to make sure I don't forget. I'm going to science the heck out of this rock. And true to life, I actually, at this point in the game, I did not have the capability to build anything that would land on the moon. So these extra science points are actually necessary. I'm not just doing this to waste time. But and one of the joys of 64-bit is that the right-click menu is sometimes a little uncooperative. It's a little hard to get these modules initiated. Not too much of a big deal, but it is a little annoying. Since this is before I had updated Module Manager and Texture Replacer DLLs, so I'm actually getting a lot better performance and a lot better responsiveness out of, say, my staging controls and the right-click menu. I don't know if that's related. It probably isn't, but I haven't had a single crash in 64-bit since I've switched over. I did a bad thing, and I was running 2 programs at once with Kerbal Space Program, and it blue screened my computer. Not a serious issue, but apparently Unity 64-bit likes to be the only child getting attention. But since we were set up on free return, I didn't have to do a burn for a return flight, and my periaps didn't actually change that much with the SOI changes. Ditch the service module high up in the atmosphere, which I will have to come back to that later and make sure it returns. It ran out of physics range. Got a goofy little visual bug, you might have seen it. The pod was almost semi-transparent on that return. And this is one problem with flying free return. You don't really, unless you pay attention to phases and such, it's hard to pick your return. And I just about set these guys down on a mountain. Well, I did set them down on a mountain. I was so worried that I ditched the heat shield to give a flatter collider mesh, because otherwise I'm afraid it might have rolled off. A couple dozen feet either way and they would have landed on a sheer side of the cliff, and I'd have lost them all. Nice healthy bounty of science returned from this flight. And over in the air division, Chuck Kerman is taking his experimental F-104 with a rocket assist up to test a new rocket motor. Actually based this on a real aircraft that darn near killed the real Chuck Yeager. If you've ever seen The Right Stuff at the end, it's that F-104 with the rockets in the back. And it pretty much went down as the movie depicted. The F-104 was a notoriously squirrely aircraft under the best of conditions, and pushed to that extreme that the aircraft, once any F-104 went into a spin, it was pretty much unrecoverable. In fact, I believe it was the German Air Force, when they sold several of them, began naming them Lawn Dart because they had such a high crash rate. I've always thought it's one of the cooler looking aircraft ever made, but it is an unforgiving beast. And this one is pretty true to life as far as handling characteristics go. If this thing gets away from you, you are going to lose it. I've had to eject my Kerbals several times. As you'll notice, this is the first plane you've seen an ejection module on. And even then, I came in a little too steep and tail struck the motor. But the rest of the plane comes back, and that's what matters. Contract complete. Get the infamous collision ribbon. Not many Kerbals get that one and survive. And as part of the workup to Apollo, all safety systems need to be checked out and tested. And this is a flight test of the launch escape tower. Couldn't set it up for an abort sequence. I had to actually stage it to get the contract to complete. But the crew survived the high G's and parachutes deploy, bring them home safely, and it's time to unlock large electrics. Because I've been so focused on my manned mission, I got off my timeline. I'm getting perilously close to Apollo 11, so it's time to send out a Mariner 4 probe. And this is just this satellite is just a long-range comms relay. I'm putting in geosync. Because I don't have... The ground station can't reach to Duna, and so I had to put this up there. So I'll have a dish to actually relay data between it and my Mariner 4 wannabe probe, which I am launching right now. And yes, I know it's technically too modern of a launcher design, but I'm really having... I just thought it looked cool, so I'm sticking with that. That's my justification for it. With vertical snap and editor extensions, it's really easy to set up these quad solid booster configurations. And unfortunately, if you pay pretty close attention, you can see it clipped off one of my rudders, or control surfaces. Wasn't a huge deal. I was still able to get it up into orbit, but it was a little difficult to fly at times. And I underestimated how long that engine would burn. It had a lot of delta V in it. In fact, I think I ditched it in a stable orbit with fuel to spare. Activate the main antenna. Which, this antenna has a really narrow range. And so if you just point it at Kerman on your way out and hope it'll catch a satellite, even something being in geosync orbit is just outside its field of view, and so you're still going to have intermittent satellite communication. So I ended up having to point it directly at my geostationary satellite. That ran me into problems that for a brief period when the satellite dives behind Kerman, I've got no uplink. So I was making extensive use of the flight computer on this flight. And it was also in this flight that I was starting to have my technical issues with 64-bit, and I briefly switched over to 32. But all of the footage I gathered was actually from 64-bit because I just... I didn't have it on 32-bit for very long, and while I was transferring jobs, it was kind of hectic to find time to play. And by the time I actually had time to play, I'd sorted out my issues with 64-bit. And I did disable signal delay, just because the developer's head is in the right place for setting that up. And if you fly strictly on flight computer, it makes sense because you have to make sure you have enough time before your maneuver to actually send the command. But at the same time, I I do think MechJeb is very useful. I don't fly with it hardly ever anymore. I might put it on some of my more advanced spacecraft in the future, just to simulate the type of systems you can expect on a modern advanced spacecraft. But I'm trying to keep this 60s level tech, so I'm flying my maneuvers as manually as possible. I disabled signal delay after this flight because I'm caught between a rock and a hard place. I can disable signal delay and fly everything manually, or I can use the flight computer, which is basically just a lobotomized MechJeb. And so I went with the lesser of two evils and disabled signal delay. Went back to the astronaut core and found Frank Kerman hanging out. Decided to add him to the crew roster. This is another wacky launcher design, which I'm having to step outside reality a little bit to design some of these just to get heavier payloads into orbit. But this is Kerpalo 10, which is going to enter into an orbit around the moon. Had to play around with fuel balancer because I put way too many of those skinny tanks on there, and they were actually still firing long after I'd exhausted the center tank. Ditch that stage. Keep wondering why it's not firing, and then I remembered I had to shut off the fuel flow from these, otherwise fuel balancer was going to suck all that into my main engine, and this would have been basically would have been burning fuel just to carry a skipper up into space to ditch it. And since this one actually has to orbit and bring itself back, it needs a transfer stage. My Kerpalo module with the CSM, or the Kerpalo CSM that I designed, cannot transfer to the moon, go into orbit and return. It just doesn't have the delta V. So we need this little transfer stage. And a good recommendation for anybody who likes keeping their orbits nice and clean, but also wants to fly things a little bit more realistic with lunar transfer stages and such. A very good idea, and it's what I tend to do, is I set my periaps to 0 on my initial transfer burn, which when you separate from your transfer stage, it'll ensure the stage will impact with the moon. Which, if you're playing with Interstellar mod, that gives you the added benefit of you can use that spent stage as a seismic impactor, which is actually what they did during the real lunar program. I'm not playing with Interstellar mod on this save. I debated it so I could get that seismic impact experiment, but I ultimately ruled against it. I even ruled out near future because while I do like that it has things like Vasimir and other advanced propulsion systems, I don't believe I'm going to be getting anywhere near that far, and a lot of that stuff is made redundant by the vanilla nuclear engine, which has such an insanely high ISP. If you can't get somewhere in the Kerbal system with the LVN nuclear engine, you need to start rethinking some of your ship designs, I guess. Burning for a lunar capture. Which, doing all this Apollo-style flights really put me in the mood to watch From the Earth to the Moon again, that old HBO special, which I am happy to say I own on DVD. So it was running in the background a lot while I ran this, and so just taking a little inspiration. Really well done series if you've never seen it. There we go, having little issues with the right-click menu. But this one is low enough to get space near the moon science, which means the orbital telescope will actually do observations based on which biome you're over. I haven't done... I don't have the equipment to look at the multispectral scan data on this particular craft, so I just kind of had to guess at it. But I'm not here to farm everything. I'm just doing a shakedown test, see what the longevity of this spacecraft is. And I discovered on this flight I don't have a near big enough waste storage capacity on it, so I had to make some revisions. But another advantage of doing this Apollo 10 mission is I can do all these near moon observation flights, and so when I finally get to the Apollo 11 style flight, I don't have to have all these heavy science modules on my CSM, and so that can save me a little weight and a little delta V, and also simplifies the job of flying. If I only have to worry about gathering science on the flight or on the landing, then I reduces the risk I'm going to forget something important, which with me is always a good thing. And the main reason why I'm trying my best to make do with 64-bit has nothing to do with wanting to be a brave pioneer and provide testing feedback. It's just the game can be pretty breathtakingly beautiful sometimes, and with the higher res textures really enhances that. So it's strictly a graphics issue why I've stuck with it for so long. And this little low res altimetry map, it can help you pick out some of the bigger biomes, but for your orbital observations and picking landing sites. But without being actually, without being able to truly look at the biome map, it makes getting them all a little tricky. And if I didn't mention it before, I'm going to mention it again. In the new KW rocketry release, the service engine has switched to running off hypergolic RCS fuel, not LFO, which is an important distinction to make before you launch all the ships you've been previously using. Set up a nice return trajectory. And this is where what I was talking about with the game being rather pretty to look at from time to time. Got a nice sunrise over the moon as we commit to our transfer burn. I still have no idea what the most efficient way to get back from the moon is. These always seem to work out pretty well, but I'm pretty much just stabbing in the dark here. I don't ever pay much attention to my return delta V, except to make sure my ship actually has enough to pull off the maneuver I've programmed. But with their observations complete and their transfer maneuver finished, the boys can relax and just enjoy the ride home. And the view while they're at it. Take one last wistful look out the window before it disappears behind the spacecraft. And this is part of how I get my camera shots for my more cinematic videos, I use curb cam or whole cam VDS for some of these. To make, like when I do a bolt-on camera shot. Yes, more clearly, that mod is whole cam VDS, HULLCAM. If you're interested, or if anybody watching this is interested, it's kind of neat. It's pretty much what inspired me to do that space shuttle riding the boosters copy. Once again, ditching the service module in high orbit. And since this seems like a good a place as any to end, this will be the last flight of this video, but next time you tune in, there will be a full Duna survey from the Mariner 4 and an actual moon landing, which I've already shot, just need to edit. As always, thank you for watching, and tune in for the next episode.